The avoidable death of Henry Nowak is not simply an isolated tragedy. It is a symptom of a wider moral transformation, one in which inherited traditions, national identity, and historical loyalties have been replaced by an ideological framework that increasingly struggles to distinguish fairness from virtue signalling, evidence from assumption, and justice from moral performance. What affects me most about the Henry Nowak murder is the casual dehumanization expressed through the officer's language, as Henry lay on the ground, struggling to breathe, repeatedly telling the officer, "I've been stabbed." His concerns were dismissed outright. Rather than investigate, the officer responded with a casual, almost mocking, "Yeah, I don't think so, mate." That choice of language really does matter. It reflects a deeper moral disconnect. Henry's suffering was treated as an inconvenience to the state, rather than an emergency. The assumption seemed clear. The white man was the aggressor, the brown man the victim. Surely this racist, violent, far-right thug, lying on the ground while the innocent minority had been wronged. Damningly, the perception appears to have preceded any serious examination of the facts. Perhaps the assumptions of the past favoured the native. Today, the pendulum has swung entirely in the opposite direction. As Reform candidate Richard Tice remarked when discussing demographic decline, "I won't be around by then." One only has to walk through modern London to witness the fruits of modernity, diversity, consumer convenience, endless consumption, food delivery at the press of a button, and a society built around economic incentives rather than cultural continuity. Citizens are encouraged to keep their heads down, trust institutions over their own observations, and embrace corporate values in place of inherited identities. The individual becomes a global consumer, disconnected from land, history, and tradition. Critics of this system are dismissed as reactionaries, gammons, or relics of the past. Meanwhile, foreign cultures are celebrated, traditional identities are deconstructed, and any expression of native attachment is treated with the utmost suspicion. The modern Western man is increasingly portrayed as something to be corrected, dismantled, or overcome. In Modernity, the reaction to Henry Nowak's death reveals a double standard. Tribal loyalty is condemned when expressed by the natives, but celebrated when expressed by minority communities. Collective identity is praised in one context and denounced in another. For many Westerners, moments of tragedy have become among the few occasions where any sense of communal identity resurfaces.
Whether Digwehr and his family chose to deceive the police after committing an act of hate is almost secondary when examining the mentality of the officer involved. Digwehr alleged racial abuse and assault by Nowak, and within the worldview of the liberal establishment, such accusations fit neatly into a familiar narrative. Whenever an attack occurs, politicians and PR teams rush to invoke the far right. Minority communities respond with outrage, demands for greater security, increased funding, and claims that they feel unsafe and unwelcome. Yet the same question that was asked in the 1960s remains unanswered. If Britain really is so hostile, why are they still here?
The officer who arrested Henry bought into this stereotype entirely. The image in his mind resembled a caricature promoted by government initiatives and politicians. The well-dressed, well-spoken, young white man, the supposed embodiment of modern extremism. Before the story had even begun, Henry had already been cast as the main villain. Society has drifted so far from a higher power and from the morality of the past that suspicion of racism is often treated as a greater sin than violence itself. Modernity elevates anti-racism to the highest moral virtue, encouraging what can only be described as suicidal empathy, often at the expense of logic and intuition. Where morality was once rooted in Christianity, duty, sacrifice, and loyalty to one's people and nation, it is now rooted in adherence to a liberal creed. Reject anti-racism and you risk social exile, debanking, vilification, and exclusion. These values are reinforced from the top down.
permeating institutions, the civil service, and ultimately, the police. Those unwilling or unable to think critically absorb these values as unquestionable truths. This morality must be constantly signalled and enforced, because it's not a natural law, but an ideological framework projected through the institutions, media, and culture for decades. To prefer one's own people is to be deemed fascistic. To wish to live among your own tribe makes you some sort of far-right extremist. Under this new morality, the police believe the foreigner over one of their own, because doing otherwise would have risked violating the moral expectations of the age in question. In the morality of the past, integrity demanded judgment based on evidence. Under modernity, righteousness often demands immediate belief. When British men fought in war, stormed beaches, and watched comrades die, were they doing so for diversity? Did they fight and die for this anti-racism? Men risked their lives for their families, their communities, and their people. They fought because they feared a future in which everything familiar would be destroyed by a foreign ideology and a foreign power. Their hope was that future generations would inherit a society reflecting the values they cherished so dearly.
What? The country of today? No, I'm sorry. The sacrifice wasn't worth the result that it is now.
Yet, veterans expressing regret or concern about modern Britain are often patronised and dismissed. Their experiences are questioned by media figures presented as moral authorities, while their attachment to nation, history and heritage is treated as outdated. Within this liberal framework, figures such as Alec Penston become relics of a bygone age, their values completely overshadowed by a progressive and globalist narrative.
In modernity, society suppresses natural loyalties and instincts while simultaneously rewarding them elsewhere. Metaphysically, modernity increasingly treats femininity as the embodiment of virtue, while portraying masculinity as something inherently dangerous. Traditional views recognize that men can be both harsh and heroic, capable of tyranny, but also courage, wisdom, sacrifice, and protection. Today, criticisms of modern social attitudes is often dismissed as insecurity, misogyny, or resentment. At its core, this ideology is increasingly hostile towards the white Western male and the institutions built. Family formation declines, fatherlessness rises, birth rates fall, and social fragmentation grows. The result is a generation increasingly disconnected from stable families, their religious foundations, and a sense of a higher purpose. Most men strive to be good, yet modern narratives frequently portray masculinity itself as suspect. If this portrayal goes unchallenged, it becomes accepted as truth. Claims that female-dominated environments are inherently more virtuous or productive are unsupported assumptions rather than realities. The DEI initiatives of the past decade are presented as ideas that require continual reinforcement through institutions, corporations, and the corporate culture. There's no wonder why figures like Andrew Tate emerged, in part because many young men felt deprived of positive models of strength, stoicism, responsibility, and fundamental purpose. Whether one agrees with such figures or not, their popularity reflects a perceived absence that seeps within modern life. Young men continue to shoulder difficult responsibilities, often without recognition. Yet modern culture frequently offers criticism rather than gratitude, hate rather than guidance. Traditional ideals of leadership, merit, discipline, and hierarchy have been reframed as oppressive or unfair, while identity politics increasingly dominates public discourse, media, and our institutions once more. Taken together, these developments represent one of modernity's central failures. Feminine values of care and affirmation have become dominant, while masculine traits such as conviction, honesty, and decisiveness are treated again with suspicion. In this view, modern institutions often prioritize the sense of feelings over facts, affirmation over truth, and emotional comfort and affirmation again over difficult realities. The result is a civilization increasingly disconnected from tradition, certainty, and higher meaning, a society that struggles to distinguish compassion from indulgence, affirmation from wisdom, and progress from decline. Liberal modernity struggles to confront its own contradictions. The supposed poster child of the modern Western woman sat down with legacy media to discuss gangbangs under the banners of empowerment and liberation, seemingly unaware that she too is a product of the same capitalist, corporate, materialist system. Meanwhile, self-righteous media commentators sit bewildered, wondering why she does not fit their vision of the ideal feminist in a progressive utopia that exists only in the minds of the bourgeoisie. The paradox is obvious. Liberal modernity continually expands its toolkit to justify and normalize behaviors that previous generations would have regarded as immoral. One has to ask, could you imagine your mother sitting across from a 20-something woman discussing public sexual degradation and calling it empowerment? On one hand, society tells us men are inherently dangerous and responsible for a culture that victimizes women. On the other, it celebrates women who openly commodify themselves in pursuit of status, wealth, and social validation. Beyond the moral question, there is a practical one. Pornography is more accessible than ever, including to children, and the cultural image being exported across the world is one of a Western society lacking restraint, dignity, and self-respect. That the same political class that condemns traditional attitudes towards sexuality often refuses to criticize the excess of so-called sexual liberalism. At a time when concerns about sexual violence continue to dominate public discussion, commercial cash cows such as Bonnie Blue are treated as symbols of liberation rather than symptoms of a broader cultural decline. The riots in Paris provide another example of modernity's inability to confront uncomfortable realities. Predictably, explanations focus on socio-economic factors, colonial history, and structural grievances. Yet, while London has experienced tension of its own, the scale and intensity seen in Paris raise broader questions about social cohesion across Europe. Critics will point out that the disorder, tribalism, and violence scene have long existed in European football culture. Yet football itself once represented something deeper, the community, loyalty, belonging, and expression of local and national identity. Men gathered around clubs, towns, and traditions over years. But over time, football became one of the first institutions transformed by modernity through commercialization and the constant moral instruction from above. The broader point is not that London and Paris are completely identical, but that both reflect wider trends across the European world. Diversity may not explain everything, but it remains central to understand the tensions emerging throughout the continent. To succeed, to really progress through society, Europe requires strength, order and hierarchy, but also a renewed confidence in its own traditions. For decades, the public has been told that concerns over immigration, integration, and the cultural change are merely products of prejudice. Yet many ordinary people have held these concerns for years, often finding themselves dismissed as outdated, ignorant, racists, or just for expressing them socially within their pubs, homes, or workplaces.
Even the Brexit debate illustrated this dynamic clearly, yet still, even today, individuals on the left parrot liberal establishment drivel, happily negating those with the very real concerns. At the same time, modern economic systems encourage mass immigration, but not out of loyalty to nationhood, only for the loyalty to growth. The global economy requires both workers and consumers. As native populations decline, replacement becomes an economic necessity within the logic of the system. People become statistics, just units of labour, contributors to GDP rather than members of a shared national community. How long can this really continue? Is Western Europe expected to accept demographic and cultural transformation indefinitely, while being told that the very concern can be solved through more funding, more programs, or more apologies for historical wrongs? Even if mass migration produced entirely peaceful and law-abiding populations, many would still argue that they have a right not to become minorities in their own countries. This is a normal instinct rather than an extremist one. What appears abnormal is the effort required to construct ideological justifications for changes that previous generations would have regarded with skepticism. As birth rates continue to fall across the Western world, demographic questions become increasingly difficult to ignore. Modernity functions almost like a replacement religion. Rather than looking upward to God, man increasingly looks upward towards a skyscraper.
I have chosen to speak to you today from the farm because places like this represent what proper Britain is about. Hard work, responsibility, effort, duty.
Liberal ideology promotes the concept of collective European guilt, while discouraging Europeans from viewing themselves as distinct people with legitimate interests of their own. Violence and social fragmentation are frequently explained away or ignored when they conflict with accepted narratives. Few will feel compelled to prioritize the preservation of European identity over the interests of their own groups. The liberal narrative often suggests that Europe's success came primarily through oppression and colonial exploitation, while the struggles of other societies can largely be explained by the actions of Europeans. In order to progress, we must reject this interpretation. It ignores cultural, civilizational, and historical differences while reducing complex outcomes to a single moral framework. Either Europeans are recognized as a distinct people with a unique civilization worth preserving, or they accept the view that their history is inherently oppressive, their culture fundamentally flawed, and their identity unworthy of protection. Globalism becomes a solution to every problem. The establishment will continue to dismantle traditional identities while condemning those who object. The question naturally arises: if a country is fundamentally oppressive and responsible for your misfortune, why remain there? Overall, this call to action is a European universal human need. If all people are interchangeable, if culture and heritage are merely superficial differences, then liberal modernity appears logical. If, however, identity, civilization, and inherited traditions carry real meaning, then preserving them becomes a legitimate concern, rather than an act of hostility towards others. We really must affirm that there is something distinctive about our European civilization, forged through centuries of achievement, struggle, and cultural development. Preserving that inheritance does not require hatred of others. These values originate from higher truths expressed through religion and culture, and cannot simply be replaced by consumerism, materialism, or liberal ideology. Despite what we are witnessing, what we have gone through, and what comes in the future, despite all this pessimism, the conclusion is not a call to anger, but to perseverance. The challenges ahead are described as cultural, philosophical, and spiritual, rather than merely political. Individuals must remain grounded, connected to higher principles, and willing to endure difficult times without surrendering to resentment or despair. The struggle will be long, but it is not hopeless. Renewal begins with conviction, self-awareness, and a willingness to defend what one believes is worth preserving.